So I've tried to film this vlog twice in the last 2 weeks, and there just seems to be obstacles and problems just getting in my way. So today I have to get this done. Before Elon Musk was sending robots in red convertibles into space, there was Jack Parsons.
10, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and booster ignition, liftoff, Space Shuttle Discovery.
Like, honestly, isn't that a cool name? Marvel? That's a great name. I would have definitely stuck with Marvel over Jack. Much like myself growing up, Jack was fascinated by science fiction literature. Now this sparked his interest in rocketry. And this is where his legend begins. Jack was a chemist, a rocket engineer, and a rocket propulsion researcher. He was one of the founders of the Aerojet Engineering Corporation and the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, JPL. One of America's greatest space pioneers. Now I'd like to say, one of humanity's greatest space pioneers. Also, just something I'd like to throw in here really quick. Now his clique or his crew of rocket enthusiasts, the nickname they were given was the Suicide Squad. Tell me that's not the coolest nickname ever. So why are we going to talk about Jack Parsons today? He seems to be an early pioneer of the idea that the paranormal is normal. The whole idea that this channel is based on. So apart from being an open-minded, free-thinking Tony Stark / Doctor Strange type, Jack was an occultist, a Thelemite occultist. In 1941, he and his wife converted to this New Age religion, Thelema. I think I said that right. If I murdered that or butchered it, let me know down in the comments. Now this New Age religion was founded by no other than the wickedest man in the world himself, Aleister Crowley. Now we discussed Aleister in an earlier video. I'll be sure to leave a link to that video somewhere up there so you guys can check that out. Crowley, I think that's how you pronounce it, not Crowley. I think I may be butchering his last name and the name of the religion, but if that be the case, let me know down in the comments, please. Parsons joined the Agape Lodge, the California branch of the Thelemite Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO. Eventually, he became the group's leader on the West Coast. At this point, you may be asking yourself, how did a person with such a scientific background get mixed into the occult? See, for Jack, it was all the same. Rocketry and the occult went hand in hand. Both just needed the same thing. And that was to be proven possible. Possible to a world so blind to see what he did, that the paranormal was normal. I would also like to point out that we could be referring to magic as something supernatural, but for the sake of the video, paranormal is what we're gonna go with. See, during the beginning, when Jack was working on rockets with the Suicide Squad, the scientific community didn't believe that it was possible. They believed that rocketry was a waste of time. They were not accepting to the idea. They thought it was a fantasy. They were too blind to see what he and the rest of the Suicide Squad saw as possible. Now, along their journey, they blew some stuff up. But they also changed the outlook of the community. Jack and his friends were just the kinds of rebels that the scientific community needed at the time if we ever planned on getting to the moon. Now I heard two versions of this, that Jack actually inherited a mansion and also that he bought the mansion with the money that he was making from rocketry. But the main thing is that Jack acquired a mansion in his hometown of Pasadena, California, and it was nicknamed the Parsonage. Now people that visited this mansion said it was filled with intelligent people, eccentric people, just all different kinds of really interesting people. The vibe there was pretty wicked. Was that like a pun? Wicked? Jack relocated the OTO's headquarters to that mansion, and they did a lot of magical practices from that location. Let's take a step back and think about Jack as a person. Now during the day, Jack was a scientist, and I'm sure that his buddies that worked with him at Aerojet were quite mild-mannered or normal. And Jack had this wild lifestyle. He was accused of seducing his Aerojet secretaries and bringing them back to the mansion to participate in these magical practices. Sometimes he would answer the door with a giant snake around his neck. He would show up to Aerojet tired and beaten from the night before, hungover. Obviously, apart from the magical practices, there was a lot of partying going on at the mansion. Some people also said that at Aerojet, on the rocket launch pad area or the test zone, he and a foreman would have gun duels. Now, at this point, a lot of people were taking rocketry seriously. So the FBI started looking into Parsons, investigating him as a possible security risk. I mean, how much more like Tony Stark could you get? I would have loved to meet Jack Parsons. Now, in 1943, he was squeezed out of Aerojet for $20,000. At the time, that was a lot of money. Now, without his rocketry to fall back on, he actually started to even worry some of his fellow OTO members. He was taking his magic to a whole nother level. Here's where Jack's story gets even more interesting and crazy. Guess who shows up in the picture? L. Ron Hubbard. Anytime I hear about L. Ron Hubbard being brought up in a person's life or a situation, there's a red flag going up. Now, it seems like L. Ron Hubbard was kind of a player, a swindler, a hustler. I'm sorry to any Scientologists watching this video. Not trying to insult the founder of your religion. I'm just telling you the vibe I got from the stories I've heard. Nobody really trusted Hubbard. But unfortunately, Jack did. Supposedly, he made up for his swindling ways by helping Jack perform one of his biggest magical feats, the Babylon workings. Now, Hubbard and Jack set out to the desert to try to summon or manifest a goddess known as Babylon. After this ritual, Jack actually came into contact or met a red-haired girl that he said was the human incarnation of this goddess Babylon. Now, in the Crowley video, we talked about Lamb and the manifestation that Alistair had. Now, Jack's manifestation was a bit different, but who's to say that this magical practice doesn't work? Now, at the end of all this, Parsons believed that the Babylon working did actually work. He was convinced that the magic was real. He declared it the greatest achievement of his life. Now, seeing as this guy made rockets, I think it's fascinating that he thought this was his greatest achievement in life. Maybe he actually did manifest something in the desert. Now, unfortunately, Hubbard actually ran away with $20,000 worth of Jack's money. And at the time, $20,000 was a lot of money, people. So L. Ron Hubbard screwed over Jack, and Jack sort of retired into the shadows. He quit the OTO, moved away from the mansion, tried to do some contracting work in rocketry, actually got pushed out by the FBI, taking away his security clearance, and retired to building explosives for films. Explosive squibs is what they're called. That's a funny word, squibs. Oh, does anybody know why they're called squibs? Let me know down in the comments. June 17, 1952, Jack's home lab actually exploded with him in it. What I read on the internet actually painted this picture for me that was very detailed. It said that half of his face was blown off, one of his limbs was completely ripped off, his legs were broken, but when they showed up to the scene, when the police showed up, he was still alive. Now, this is kind of what sealed the story for me. His life was fascinating. Be it he was an occultist, and a lot of people are not into the idea of, magic and sex rituals and all this weird stuff that goes on there. He was very much almost like taken out of the pages of a Marvel comic book. He actually looks a lot like Tony Stark's father, or Tony Stark. His death is almost cinematic. You could make a full feature film about Jack Parsons. I couldn't get the image of, the end out of my mind, so I had to make this video because it just seems like the way a hero would go. The way somebody with such a fascinating story would go. When the police arrived, they said that they found his lab, blown out, and I'm just imagining it all ripped to shreds, and he's laying there. And there was, schematics for rockets on the walls, and sigils and occult symbols on the walls, and it all raining down, sort of just from the explosion. The paper's burning, he's laying there. And unfortunately, he passed away after that explosion. Tell me that his story isn't fascinating. It just goes to show that there are very fascinating people out there in the world. It's just sometimes we don't hear about them. So I felt like I had to make this video. Official report for his death claims that it was an accident. They actually said that they found a heroin needle in his lab. But his peers and the people that worked with him said that he was very neat, you know, very organized, and sort of like a stickler when it came to working. So some of them didn't believe that this was an accident. Some claim that the explosion came from the floorboards, so underneath the floor. Also, he did have a issue with Howard Hughes, supposedly, where he stole some documents from Howard Hughes. The hit could have been done by Howard Hughes. Throwing Howard Hughes into the picture, L. Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley, just makes this story even more fascinating. So I made this video because of Jack's fascinating story. I feel like you guys had to hear this story. For me, it was super interesting. I had never heard about Jack. And he did help get us to the moon. You know, he helped build the rockets that we see today. Did you know that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, was partially founded by an occultist? I mean, those kinds of things are usually left out of history books. I really need to look into the Babylon workings. An occultist making squibs, explosives for films. How many occultists are still working in films? How many occultists are working with you right now that you have no idea are doing, you know, magical practices when they get home? The spiritual, the magical, and, you know, the paranormal seem to be a more open and everyday idea these days. So don't be surprised if you meet somebody that is practicing magic. Do you practice magic? Let me know what you believe down in the comments. Share your story, your experiences, and remember guys, the paranormal is normal.